They noticed the shoes before anything else. A scuffed pair of flip-flops, faded rubber straps, soles flattened by years of walking. The flip-flops tapped out a soft, incongruous rhythm against the hotel's marble floor, and for a few seconds the crystal chandeliers and polished brass seemed to sigh, as if offended by the sound. A woman in a stained sweatshirt stood by the fountain, shoulders steady, backpack sagging. She looked lost to some, like a story that didn't belong in this chapter of town. Rodrigo saw her and smiled the small, practiced smile of someone who had learned to divide the world into guests who paid and problems that didn't. He straightened his tie again and tilted his chin. "This is a luxury hotel, not a shelter," he said, loud enough for the nearest guests to hear. The words dropped into the lobby like a single, brittle piece of glass. A ripple passed through the crowd. People leaned closer to their conversations. A woman behind the receptionist murmured, "Do you see the shoes?" A businessman glanced down, then away, as if he'd been asked to witness something private and uncomfortable. The woman in the sweatshirt met Rodrigo's gaze without flinching. Her name was Clarice, though Rodrigo had no reason to know that yet. She had come to the Grand Stellar Hotel intentionally, the way a surgeon approaches an operating table, calm, purposeful, invisible, except where she chose to be seen. Behind her plain clothes was a history few would have guessed. She was the billionaire's adopted daughter, the public face of a family fortune, someone who could change the hotel's fortunes with a signature. Today she chose anonymity to test the thing that mattered to her more than profit, whether the hotel treated every human being with dignity. Rodrigo tapped a screen and pursed his lips. "Do you have a reservation?" he asked, with the performative patience of someone who expected no. Around him, a few guests overtly watched, others pretended not to. Clarice reached into her backpack and placed a worn card on the desk. The print was faded from years of use, but it was legitimate. "Yes," she said. Her voice was soft but precise. "Clarice Moreau, check in." Rodrigo's eyes flicked to the screen, then back to her shoes. He smirked. "We don't take walk-ins like this," he announced. "This is a luxury hotel. Guests have standards." His words were a wedge, and the lobby obliged. The space between people widened. A colleague at the next terminal, Marcelo, snorted quietly, the sound turning into discreet laughter. Augusto, the general manager, paused a few steps behind Rodrigo, hands folded, expecting the situation to resolve itself. The clerk would rebuke an offending guest, and the lobby would breathe again. He had learned to let his team enforce the tone of the hotel. After all, perception sustained them. The right accent at the door, the correct cuffling at the bar. But something in Clarice's eyes didn't match the timid confusion he had assumed. She watched Rodrigo with a patient, measured attention. She could have left and never come back. She could have made a dozen less confrontational choices. Instead, she folded her hands, unhurried. Rodrigo raised his voice a notch. "You don't belong here. We have a strict guest policy." He inhaled, loud and theatrical, and called across the counter. "Augusto, are you going to let us start checking people in like this?" Augusto stepped forward. "Rodrigo, handle the check-in." His tone contained the authority of someone used to smoothing edges, not creating them. Clarice set her palm on the counter. "Could you show me the hotel's guest code?" she asked. It was a quiet request, but now the hush in the lobby sharpened. People leaned in. The hotel's motto was nothing glamorous, just a line printed in the staff manual that the family had insisted be posted in employee areas. Every guest deserves dignity and respect, regardless of appearance or circumstance. It was the clause that had made Clarice insist years ago that training be repeated annually. She had never imagined having to test it herself. Rodrigo's lips thinned. "We have standards," he said again, as if saying it more would make it truer. "This place is for our clientele. We can't be a drop-in for—" He let the word hang. "Please," Clarice said. "Our guest code. Show it to me." Her voice was softer now, but the calm in it was a different authority, one that didn't need to raise volume to claim attention. Augusto hesitated, then moved to the service drawer and withdrew the staff manual. "Section 4, he began, throat tight. He read aloud at Clarice's request, and his voice shook slightly with the awareness that the words were more than policy. They were a promise someone's family had made. A murmur threaded through the guests. "Well," someone whispered, "what are you going to do?" Clarice drew a breath and let it go. She could have made the moment theatrical, the reveal that would turn the room into a chorus line. The billionaire's daughter, laughed at by a clerk, now exposing him through wealth. She had seen scenes like that in plays. She did not want theater. She wanted correction that would stick. She placed her hand lightly on the staff manual. "I'm not here because I need your hotel," she said. "I'm here because this hotel needs to be what it claims. I'm the family's representative. My father trusts me to ensure the Grand Stellar's promise is kept. My name is Clarice Moreau. I'm the billionaire's adopted daughter." The words were plain, unadorned. They landed in the lobby like a gavel. Silence stretched. Rodrigo's smirk dissolved.
The customers who had been waiting for spectacle found themselves uncomfortable witnesses to something quieter, the collapse of an assumption. Marcelo's laughter died. Augusto felt his whole posture change as the realization spread that someone with the authority to sack him or to rewrite front desk policy stood there in a sweatshirt. Rodrigo tried to recover with a brusque laugh, a reflexive shield. "I didn't," he began. "You were making a spectacle," Clarice said, cutting across him gently but without allowing evasion. "You were enforcing a standard on someone who did not pose a threat, and you did so loudly to show the others you were in charge. That's not leadership. That's performance. That's humiliation." Rodrigo's face reddened. He looked to Augusto as if seeking rescue in protocol. Augusto met his gaze with a look that acknowledged the complexity. Staff discipline was one thing, the hotel's reputation another, and the family's expectations a third. "You could say I embarrassed you in front of guests," Clarice continued. "You could say you were only following a sense of what the hotel needs. But you crossed a line that this establishment's code forbids. We do not weaponize dignity." A few guests shifted, some with relief, others with the guilty recognition of having watched. The woman with the neat hat murmured, "I'm glad she said something." Clarice didn't reach for punishment. She had watched too many institutions solve minor breaches with major spectacles, firing someone publicly, broadcasting discipline so that the audience felt momentarily satisfied, but nothing underlying changed. She wanted more than a headline. She wanted practice that would change behavior. "Rodrigo," she said, looking him directly in the eye, "I could terminate you, and it would be justified under our code, but that would fix the surface and leave the bottom the same. That's not what I want. I want you to learn to see people before you judge them. I want you to understand the work that supports this hotel, the hands behind every polished surface. I want you to respect them the way our code requires." Rodrigo's lips trembled. He swallowed. He had never expected mercy that felt like a demand rather than a pardon. "You will have 3 months of remedial training," Clarice said. "You will spend 1 month in housekeeping, 1 month in the kitchen, and 1 month in maintenance. You will be supervised and assessed. If at the end of those 3 months your attitude remains unchanged, we will revisit disciplinary action. But you will not be dismissed today for this. You will not be publicly shamed. You will learn." Augusto let out a breath he hadn't known he'd been holding. Some of the staff's tension eased into something quieter, a cautious gratitude that the decision balanced accountability with instruction. Marcelo mouthed, "Wow," and then, embarrassed by his own direction of complicity, looked away. Rodrigo's reaction was not immediate contrition. It was the jagged shock of someone whose map of the world had been redrawn. His eyes flicked between Clarice and the manual on the desk, and for the first time he seemed to measure the gap between what he had been taught to value and what the family who owned the hotel said they valued. "Housekeeping?" he repeated, voice small and incredulous. "Cleaning? Washing?" "Yes," Clarice said. "The people who make this place shine deserve to be seen. Work alongside them. Learn how they're spoken to, how their hours are scheduled, how supplies are rationed. Spend time in the kitchen and understand the pace and the heat. Learn what it feels like to bend and lift and fix. The point is not humiliation. The point is education. It is impossible to treat people with respect if you do not know what their lives look like." The lobby watched like a congregation. Some shifted uncomfortably. A young bellhop, usually invisible beneath the noise, felt his throat go tight. The guests who'd been reading their phones closed them. A woman with pearls met Clarice's eyes and nodded, as if understanding something she had not wanted to examine about herself. For Rodrigo, the next moments were private but visible. His jaw clenched. He swallowed again. Tears gathered at the corner of his eyes, an instinctive human response that was not theatrical. It was the release of someone confronting the distance between how he wanted to be seen and the small cruelties he'd let define him. He began, then stopped, the apology forming but fragile. "You won't be excused," Clarice said softly. You will apologize to the guest you humiliated, and you will begin work tomorrow. Augusto will arrange the schedule. Marcelo, you will assist with training. This is not a spectacle, it's an obligation. Augusto nodded, and his voice was steady with the gravity of someone now responsible for translating family expectations into practical steps. We'll write up a plan. Mentors, rotations, evaluations. No PR stunt, real work. And we'll post notice to staff that this is part of our commitment to the guest code. Clarice dressed the edict in practical detail because habits did not change with concrete steps. She believed in the scaffolding of learning, clear timeframes, mentors, assessments. 3 months sounded strict enough to require real effort and soft enough to offer redemption. It was a plan that made people accountable and gave them a path forward. When the guest who had been spoken over earlier stood to accept Rodrigo's apology, she brushed at her shoulder as if removing an invisible weight. Her voice was steady. "Thank you," she said. "I appreciate your apology." The lobby's atmosphere shifted. What had been derision softened into something like curiosity, then respect. Not for Clarice's wealth, but for the way she used it. Not for spectacle, but for repair.
Later, in the quiet of the manager's office, Augusto and Clarice spoke in lower tones. "You didn't have to reveal yourself," he said. "No," she replied, "but I had to see what happens when our values are tested by small, everyday choices. It's easy to be charitable when it's visible. It's harder to live dignity when it's invisible." She folded her hands and looked out over the lobby. Luxury is not about the marble or the chandeliers. It's about the standard you hold when no one is watching. Rodrigo began his first morning in housekeeping before dawn. He learned the names of linens, the weight of a cart when the elevator screamed under a load, and the slow ritual of polishing a room until it matched the hotel's promise. He burned his hands on a hot oven in the kitchen and understood the rhythm of the chefs. He crawled into crawl spaces in maintenance and found, under the grime, a kind of satisfaction in making things work. The early humiliation he'd inflicted returned to him in small, corrective echoes. The way a chambermaid looked up from scrubbing and walked away as if she had been seen. The quiet nod from a line cook who'd had to teach him how to julienne vegetables without waste. It didn't erase his error in a day. Some mornings he still carried the aftertaste of pride like a stone. But slowly the stone smoothed. Colleagues who had once rolled their eyes at his front desk tough talk began to offer guarded smiles. Guests, watching the staff's competence, could sense when someone had been forced to understand the work behind their comforts. Augusto sent Clarice regular updates, attendance, attitude, small acts that suggested change, a sincere apology offered without prodding, a supervisor's comment that Rodrigo had stayed an extra hour to finish a job because someone needed help. Clarice read each report and felt the balance she'd sought, firmness coupled with instruction. In the months that followed, the story that had begun in the lobby became less about a humiliating rebuke and more about the hotel's insistence on its own name. Grand Stellar, not as a sign to be polished, but as an obligation to keep. Guests began to overhear different conversations at the desk, staff asking about guests' needs with a new patience, bellhops coordinating discreetly so they did not expose patrons, managers checking staff schedules to avoid burnout. One evening, months after the incident, Clarice returned to the lobby, not incognito this time, but without cameras or speeches. She stopped by the front desk, where Rodrigo now folded his tidier smile into a more genuine expression. He looked up, and for a moment their eyes met. There was no need for a declaration. He nodded once, simple and honest. She thought of the flip-flops that had been the image of the scandal. They were still shoes, nothing more.
The real change lived in the rooms that had been scrubbed more carefully because the person cleaning them had been heard, in the kitchen where a recipe was preserved because the chef felt respected, in the maintenance closet where a repairman had been given the time and tools to do his job well. Clarice left the hotel that night walking on the same marble she had once crossed in anonymity. The chandeliers glittered, but their light meant something different now. Luxury, she had learned and helped others to learn, was not an exclusionary label. It was a standard of care. It was the dignity extended to the lowest task and the quiet assurance that a human being would not be turned into an anecdote. If this scene made you uncomfortable, share your thoughts in the comments. Stories like this remind us that respect is a practice, not just a policy. At the entrance, a young woman paused to offer Clarice a small smile. She had once been the guest Rodrigo had rebuked. Clarice returned the smile, nothing flashy, simply human. "Thank you for staying," she said. The young woman blinked. "For being here," she answered. Clarice walked away thinking of the manual's line and the weight it carried. True luxury, she believed, was not the sound of crystals against sunlight.